Hello, thank you guys so much for coming to this video today. I really appreciate it. I've got another awesome podcast for you. This is the Cardano Aura. We bring people that are adding value to the Cardano ecosystem on the podcast and learn what they've been working on. And this is actually my third podcast ever with Frederick Regard. He's the CEO of the Cardano Foundation. So we're going to be going into everything they've been working on, and it seems like they've been moving pretty quickly. So, just to get started on a lighthearted note, how are you doing today, Frederick?
I'm doing really well. It's been a long day already and so much great stuff to do.
Yep, long day, and I'm sure there's still more to go. So for people that are new to Cardano, the past 2 years has been exponential for Cardano's growth in terms of community and new users that are coming in, and many of them may have not seen our last two podcasts. What is the Cardano Foundation?
Yeah, the Cardano Foundation is a non-profit Swiss foundation where the purpose is really to think about how do we ensure that the technology, which we call the Cardano blockchain, actually also will be the principal technology in the decades to come. So we are not the builders of the blockchain. We are more looking at the long arch. And secondly, we're looking at, so if you really create a successful DeFi company on Cardano, what do you need to bridge that to the real world? Because what's happening in the real world is that when you get a lot of employees or you get a lot of turnover, you might actually have an audit requirement, you might have a bank requirement, you might need to do some billing, you do certain things. And all of that kind of put pressure on you and means that you have to leave the bespoke place, which is called the Cardano blockchain. And that's where the Cardano Foundation comes in. So we're looking at this integration layer between the blockchain and between all of these business models and these cool operating models, which is now emerging and being, adopted by the Cardano blockchain, and ensuring that they can bridge with the real world. So really anchoring Cardano as we know and love it into the real world.
Awesome. So how would you work with, let's say a DeFi, someone who wants to build a DeFi protocol on Cardano and stay on the Cardano blockchain? What are the steps for a project to work with the Cardano Foundation on that?
So actually, that's a very good question, and the steps might be a little bit complicated because, as I was trying to allude to, we are really focusing on the infrastructure piece. Mm-hmm. So when you think about it, there is a value capture layer, and that's typically where the DeFi protocol sits. And that's also where the gaming protocol sits, and that's where somebody who wants to use the database called a blockchain would be operating. So they're trying to capture some value on top of the operating model. Then what we have below is what we call the value creation layer. And the value creation layer has two large components to it. One is the actual blockchain, which is very much the domain of IoT, until we can get into a situation where we can get more third-party contribution to the actual blockchain and we get more action around the SIPs process, and we can get an exit strategy from the SIPs process so the community knows that when they're proposing something and it goes through certain steps that there either is a funding mechanism or way to implement it. And in there is also where we have a lot of these utility tools, such as a DB Sync, or we need to have exchanges around that, or we need to have the ability to have an end of day file or an end of period file to ensure that it can go well into your bookkeeping system so you can pay the taxes in the country you're in. Outside that you might be in a country who accept the DAO or something like that, but many others would be, need to pay some taxes. And that's exactly where we belong. And where we're trying to make the most of our effort is in this value creation layer. So when a DeFi protocol comes and says they would like to work with Cardano Foundation, it's typically because they're lacking something. So they have a really good idea to do something up in the value capture layer, but they see there's a gap between what they're trying to create and what the blockchain and the existing infrastructure stack is actually offering. And that's where we then go in with them and we listen to the feature request and we see if we can either build it together, if we can get somebody to build it, if we can do an RFP, if we can give a grant, or in other ways, how can we get to a situation that not only that DeFi protocol can get this missing infrastructure piece, that belongs to the whole ecosystem. So instead of the Cardano Foundation focusing on one use case, one company, we tend to think about how do we ensure that when we build something together with the DeFi protocol, that this can be used across the board. So a good example on that is, for instance, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but Matthias Benkor from our team, he did a community ecosystem developer survey. And there it was asked, what is the 10 most used libraries or tools which people are using? And one of those is actually the dApp, which basically is a came out of a SIPS proposal where we got Immorco to the table, we spent some money on the table, and we got 5 binaries to implement that. And that means that a lot of DeFi protocols and NFT protocols on top of that can then use that tool. So we think about it like
Do you
this.
know what CIP that was by any chance?
Oh, I can't remember that, but we
Oh,
can
no
put it in your
worries.
show notes.
For
Yeah.
whatever reason, the numbers really stick with me. So yeah, continue. Sorry for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So, but that's kind of the idea. The idea is that if we build a tool, that it becomes available for everyone, and wherever you are in the world, you can build your value capture on top of that. So we're really trying to be in that kind of the bridge between the value capture and the value creation layer.
So that's why you guys have been hiring developers recently, correct?
Yes. So as you know, I've been on board for 2 years now. And when I took over the Cardano Foundation, there was very, very few technical people. I think if we somehow are going to be the custodian of the brand and the code, and we're going to participate in the governance going forward, it's extremely important that we actually are able to read the code, that we can understand how the incentives play out, but also that we have the ability to understand when people are asking for help with a piece of infrastructure connecting to the blockchain to do a reporting to a bank or to do something, that we actually can look at the architecture and can start actually writing specs and scope on it. But besides that, there's a couple of things which unfortunately you probably won't get rich by doing, but needs to get done.
Yeah.
And I think, now luckily there's I think there's 5 or 6 different versions of DB Sync out there. So different people have said, DB Sync definitely does not work as good as it does. But what we think is that there definitely needs to be some kind of a reference code around some of this utility. So the idea is to upgrade the developers, or upgrade the knowledge, the IT knowledge and the programming knowledge of the Cardano Foundation, ensure that we get the best of the open source ecosystem. That's why we hired Dear Quandle. So when we build something that actually is being built in such a way that third parties can contribute to it, and by that it gets this snowball effect running, that if people need something, they can contribute to it. There's an established process, like the SIPS process, but there's a structure to it, but also that the libraries has a certain structure. And that means that, that they're built in such a way that you understand what the code is doing, and you can actually read the notes in there, and there's ways to interact with it. And that can be very hard if you build something and it's a small team, maybe 5 to 6 people who's been working on it, and they never really meant to get outside contribution, compared to building something where you from the start are thinking about how do you get outside contribution. So there's many reasons why we're going down the developer path, but the real thing is, how do we ensure that we can build some of these developer tools? How can we build utility things which can ensure that there is reference applications out there which the community can take and they can use in wherever country and whatever vertical they see a value capture is needed in.
Yeah, I mean, building a strong open source ecosystem on Cardano is huge, because it was one team that built DB Sync, and it was IOG. And as we move forward to, a better, more decentralized protocol, you need, large entities building out open source tooling for developers, whether it be dApp projects or even just DAOs on Cardano. So yeah, from my perspective, that's great to hear. And that really leads me right into my next question about, the role of the Cardano Foundation when, the 3 entities, started in 2017, IOG, Emergo, and the Cardano Foundation. Everything's changed since then. It's been 5 years. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary here recently. So what is the Cardano Foundation's role in Cardano now? We've talked about it a little bit, but how has that shifted, in the past 5 years?
Yeah, so I was not there 5 years ago, so it's a little bit hard for me to do like a hard reference point.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. It's shifted a lot. So has the protocol. The protocol now has, hundreds of applications on it, and there's, thousands of people who write code every single day and so on, right? But how I look at it is that there's a couple of things who needs to happen. So first of all, the community is extremely important, because with a public permissionless blockchain where the code is public source, maybe not open source. So today our code is actually not what we call open source, but public source. That means it's available, but there's not a good way to contribute to it. And the code is, even though it's very strong, it's not written in such a way that contribution and the social systems and initiatives around it is there. In the first aspect, what I'm thinking about is how do we ensure that the Cardano blockchain becomes more of a contributory ecosystem. So not just IOD always have to, pay and do the feedback and do everything, but how do we get the people who rely on the blockchain to actually participate in it? Secondly, why that's important is that when you think about it from an economic incentives perspective, and none of us know if the ADA utility token goes up and down. So we just have to kind of say, okay, so if that's stable, we have then some reserves out there, and luckily we have a very good monetary policy, right? But how do we ensure that over the years to come, that there is sufficient incentive for people to keep contributing to the future Cardano technical roadmap and keep implementing that if the economic incentives are dwindling or going down? Or how do we ensure that the economic resources are being replenished in such a way that they actually make sense to stay in it? And more importantly, maybe even dependent on that, is the stake pool operators. So when you look at it today, it's probably less than 1% of the incentives who go to the stake pool operators are covered by the current transaction fee. And the transaction fee, the amount of transactions in certain days are actually larger than Ethereum or larger than Bitcoin. So it's not like there's nothing happening on chain. Mm-hmm. It's more to do with how much does it actually need to happen to think about economic sustainability. And I think open source is potentially one of those ways where you've seen and you've vetted that model and you've seen how large projects like the Apache Foundations or the Linux Foundation actually creates an ecosystem where the people who rely on the underlying technology stack, they're willing to participate, contribute, and ensure a future technical roadmap. So I think that's the one part. Then there's up in the value capture layer going all the way down from the actual users of an application down to this level is what we think about as the community part. And here we've raised our hand and said, we want to do the Cardano Summit. We want to ensure that we can, as much as possible, orchestrate and encourage a positive community out there. And when I say community, that can be very wide, right? And sometimes you think, you're a part of the community, but you actually never interacted with the other part of the community. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Cardano community is very big these days. So we have a large community team. And we're starting to build a marketing team, because one of the things we never intended to do, but just it needed to be done, was I think Cardano needs to do more marketing. So now one of the largest milestones we have this year is the Cardano Summit. This is going to be a huge celebration. 50 places around the world is already confirmed, and the main event is going to be in Switzerland, in Lausanne. And we're hoping for around 2,500-3,000 people to come there. And with less than 5 days to go, we have already 995 speaker nominations. So that's a lot. We are lacking a few speakers in the wallet category, which I think is a shame. There's only 19 nominations there. We are lacking some people in the explorers and tools category, like Cardano Cube and so forth. They've only received 3 nominations there. But the whole thing is about how do we encourage and celebrate that massive growth we've seen on top of the Cardano protocol. But it's also about attracting people who's not been on Cardano before. So trying to get some people in to come to the summit who can go around in an ecosystem of Cardano lovers and Cardano enthusiasts and talk to people about why Cardano is so special. And so we're hoping that that's going to be not just a fantastic event in Europe, but all around the world. And that we really can, showcase some cool use cases. We can get some nice technology updates from IOG. We can have stake pool operators on stage to talk about the tooling they've done. We can have, the ecosystem coming together, but also a lot of people who's, starting to slowly chew on, wow, EUTXO is actually something really special. And you know what, this scales really good because of some of the cryptographic primitives we are using, which other blockchains are not using. And there's a lot of incitement and things going on when you start speaking to the CTOs out there today.
Yeah, I personally think events are very important for increasing the density of partnerships between businesses and community members. And I'm really excited to see, 50 events around the world. I've really gone to, since COVID, all of the, Cardano meetups that are large, like the Wyoming one and the one we had in Consensus in Miami and now Rare Bloom. So I'm really looking forward to flying out to Europe for the first time and getting to meet, some European Cardano community members. Really, really excited for it. I wanted to take a little bit of a jump back. We were talking about incentives earlier, and you mentioned that the transaction fees only cover 1% of the stake pool operators' return. So to give people some foundation for that, the way that Cardano was designed, instead of having a halvening event like Bitcoin, every 4 to 6 years the rewards get cut in half, but it happens slowly over time. When we first started, I want to say the rewards were about 5.5% on average if you're a delegate in the Cardano ecosystem. Right now, we're looking at about 3.8 to 4.2, depending on that luck there. And what's supposed to account for that is transaction fees. As Cardano grows and the transactions increase, and once we have Hydra and we have scaling, and Cardano is a world financial operating system, the transaction fees ought to cover the rewards from the reserves going down over time. And what he just mentioned there is that only 1% of those fees are being paid currently by transaction fees. So, with that, I clearly see, the incentive problem there. Hey, we only have 1% covering right now. And, 4 to 6 years, we're going to be at, maybe 1.8% or 2%. So with that, how are you guys looking at incentivizing stake pool operators and delegates in the future?
So the way we look at it is that there's a couple of really cool sites out there who's done some dashboards in the community. And I specifically love one from Matus and his team, who basically has a very nice rainbow chart. I think currently today, I was looking at it, around 48% of all transactions done on the Cardano blockchain in the last epoch actually were let's say non-value transactions. And what I mean about a non-value transaction is a transaction where you either use metadata, you use native assets, you use a Pluto smart contract, or in any other way actually use the blockchain as it was supposed to be done. So where in the first phases of the Cardano ecosystem, we needed liquidity. We needed the access of a fiat ADA rail. Now what we need very, very much and urgently is that when these business models grow, when people really start looking at enterprises on Cardano, we need to ensure that some of these exchanges or regulated custodians or even banks, as we have on board now, and as you probably know, the Cardano Foundation support the integration of banks, exchanges, and custodians and wallet providers. And we have about 355 of those we support at the moment in the last hard form. We need to get to the next step, and the next step is that they can deploy these ADA on the actual blockchain. And step one is called single stake pool operators, so that they're not just having their own stake pool, and then we have some kind of centralization because I don't know, a specific exchange is very big and they want to ensure they have everything under control. So ensuring that we can get to a single stake pool operators is very important. And we worked very close to a Swiss bank called Signum. So they're actually the first regulated bank who actually have the ability to do single stake pool operators delegation through direct deposits with a fully regulated bank. And there's a couple of others on the way there. And the second thing is voting. I think if you learned anything around blockchain governance, it's about participation. And even though Catalyst is amazing, there's still a very low participation. The lower participation you have, more is the higher the likelihood is you get some odd events that a project is voted in which probably shouldn't have been voted in, and the research is not done, and there could be some things. But a blockchain like Cardano is really built on participation. So therefore, the next thing is we really want to do is to ensure participation, so the voting. And then the big elephant is where I started the conversation. I think the ADA utility token is amazing. And yes, it can be used like Bitcoin is used today. 1-to-1, one-to-many, many-to-one. And I think there were some good examples after the Vasil hard fork with the Typhoon wallet, where somebody sent hundreds of transactions out to pay some loyalty, and they paid less than 4 ADA for it. So you really see how EUTXO scales now. My point about that is that you need to go from these simple value transactions where people are sending ADA from A to B to actually start merging identity into it, to start merging NFTs into the transaction. Because this is one of the value propositions from the Cardano blockchain, which is so big, which other blockchains has not chosen to embrace in their architecture. So what I think is that the Cardano Foundation has one of the main milestones and KPIs we're looking at is how do we promote not all transactions, because we need more transactions and we need a bigger ratio of transactions who either uses smart contracts, Plutos, Marlowe, metadata, and so on. So that's one of the places we are using a lot of brain power. We are spinning up marketing resources. We are starting to do product-based marketing. There's going to be specific, let's say, seminars and speeches at the Cardano Summit who's going to approach some of those subjects. And, we're going to try and promote cases like the MOU we just did with the country of Georgia, because what the country of Georgia actually is doing is they're using the blockchain more than just the native utility of ADA. And we think that the more people who kind of sees that there is there's not just a value in it, but the total cost of ownership for operating a solution like that goes down based on good education, quality documentation, having the ability to contact the Cardano Foundation's integration team and speak to them about best practices. All of that is going to a direction where hopefully we can move that timeline that we can get, economic sustainability while still having, very good and, as little as possible in transaction fees. I mean, the worst that can happen is that we end up in a situation where we are seeing a split community because some of the community wants the transaction fees to go up because on the short term that might give you an increase to the reserves, and the rest is saying, yeah, but if it goes up too much, we get into a situation where the total cost of ownership for operating a long-term solution on Cardano doesn't fit. And I think that's this bias we have with these features on the Cardano blockchain, which is so interesting, and it's really a joy that we have this functionality about these protocol parameters to think about.
We spoke a lot about incentive there, and in the past few years, a lot of single stake pool operators and multi-pool operators have brought up issues with certain parameters that incentivize decentralization moving forward. The first one is A naught, Cardano's pledge incentive parameter, and also the K parameter, which is the optimal number of stake pools in the Cardano ecosystem. Do you feel that moving forward that it's the Cardano Foundation's role to try to find the answers and come to the community with some potential answers to this incentive problem? Because for the past couple years it seemed as if IOG was going to do that, but it keeps getting pushed back for Vasil or for Alonzo or for Mary, and it does seem very important to have a proper foundation for incentive because there is a point of no return with that. So do you feel that that's the Cardano Foundation's role moving forward with incentive?
I feel that the Cardano Foundation should point to these facts. We need to educate the community, and in the community there's already a lot of subject matter experts who's coming up, who is doing some economic modeling and doing different things. But we need to ensure that people understand that we actually do have a choice. There is a way to do these things. And currently on the protocol parameters, we don't have a process or procedure of how you actually request a change and how we validate that. So the only way of doing it today is to misuse or to use the SIPs process to do that. But when we did this community ecosystem developer survey, we actually saw that there was a double-digit amount of people who never heard about the SIPs process. So we certainly think that it's the Cardano Foundation's job to educate and to point attention to that we have this flexibility in that. But I also think that it is Cardano Foundation's job, if we see that the incentives gets out of order, if I may say it like that, that we raise our hand and we point to that. But it also is important that people understand that this has never been done before.
Yeah,
never had a situation. Yeah, and it's all interdependent, right? So you cannot please everybody, but I think the education about protocol parameters, the education about long-term versus short-term economic incentives, the education about what you just said before, which is so important to say also, is that Cardano's staking is not locked. You go to other blockchains, the staking is locked, right? There is a slashing methodology in it, and there's other things. And what that really shows is that the architecture of Cardano is not only at the same level or superior, right? Because we haven't seen any attacks on it, and what we've seen has been able to be handled. But the fact that it's not locked gives you more freedom to basically already put your vote in there. And that's why I said before, it's so important that you can vote with wherever you have your ADA. And voting today can either be a voting catalyst, but it can also be which stake pool are you actually delegating to. So I think this means more than what people realizes. So there's a huge difference whether you're with a centralized exchange who doesn't allow you to vote, or whether you actually move to an exchange or move to a wallet, a non-custodial wallet, where you can actually show your trust. As this helps with the security, plus it helps with the stake pool operators who goes beyond every single day to do content like you're doing, or to do tools and systems to support the Cardano protocol. So I think there's not only a security parameter, but it actually also is about placing your bet and voting on the people you think is the right people to build and lead the ecosystem going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, the initial design of Cardano without slashing was based solely on incentive is what matters. If you incentivize the right action that leads towards decentralization over time, there's no reason to slap anyone on the wrist. So, and another good thing about Cardano too is you mentioned that there's no lock. Well, oftentimes on Ethereum and other blockchains, not only do you have to lock your tokens up, you have to give them to a third party or to a smart contract. And that exposes you to a lot more risk for that yield. And oftentimes, in my opinion, that yield is not worth it for that added risk. So I'm curious on your guys' focus on, single stake pool operators. I am 100% for supporting, small businesses, and that's obviously what single stake pool operators are. But, since the initial delegation proposal, you guys have always supported solely single SPOs. And I'm curious as to why. Is that because they're just new, small businesses or developers in this ecosystem that didn't really get the support that they needed prior?
So our previous delegation strategy was a bit more random, right? So we were picking single stake pool operators, then it was a randomization. And the idea here was we needed to ensure that we had sufficient staking going on. So we really wanted to get to a situation where we can say, there was a lot of staking going on. And we today have, 75% of all ADA is actually staked. So I think that's already a very positive measure. Now, the next thing which is happening is we've seen some centralization with some very, successful exchanges. We've also seen that we've not, the K factor on Alpha Node has not really moved, as you alluded to before. And we don't have the mandate to basically move that. And I think there is some optionality to do that. So the way we think about it is that we saw that a lot of the smaller stake pool operators was really not running a stake pool only because they wanted to have an income or were a small business. They did it because they loved the Cardano vision. They really wanted to contribute to the ecosystem, and they saw the ecosystem from a different aspect of what potentially a large DeFi protocol or what potentially a large exchange would look at it in. And therefore we said, okay, so if they're struggling actually to get attention, how do we on one hand give them some attention, but also on the other hand give them some ability to end more blocks, and by that getting more ADA from the actual protocol. And then we basically created a system as we have today where you apply on our website, you fill in a form, and then our community team and our partnership team validates your form and gives you a rating. And if you're on the short list there, we basically we do a small compliance check, mainly in terms of what we can see. We get some help from the community there as well. And then we delegate to a randomization of that list. And what that indirectly is actually it's an indirect grant, right? Because we're not optimizing towards yield, which we could do, but we're actually optimizing towards the impact of people who's building and contributing in the ecosystem, specifically from the agile and technical community. So that's the idea. And we just published a blog series, which we can put it in your show notes, right? Who actually talks about why we're doing that, but also trying to put a spotlight, a more direct spotlight on what these stake pool operators actually are doing. Because a lot of these are maybe not as good at doing a YouTube channel, or maybe not as good as doing a blog post, but they're working in the engine room and creating tools like explorers or like websites, which most of us use every single day. It helps us to navigate the ecosystem, and by that, we're actually getting tools out there who helps everybody really.
Yeah, from my perspective, that's the most valuable thing you can do. Choose people that are competent in this ecosystem, that's already built existing tooling, and then use your guys' stake to fund out the development, for that building and help them and make sure they stay here, even as we head into perhaps a global recession. So yeah, I really like the change in the delegation strategy there, and looking at some of the people that you have delegated to. It gives me a bit of solace, a bit of yes, these people are being funded. They're going to keep building these tools that we all use. So yeah, thank you for that.
A big shout out though. I mean, you need to, if you're a single stake pool operator, please go in on our website. Please go in and fill in this survey, because if you have an opportunity to get a delegation to, I think that's financially very interesting, but also getting the spotlight and getting in contact with our community team and so on. So if you're not already in the survey, please do so. I think this is only very positive. There's no real drawback on it.
Yeah. So with that focus on single stake pool operators, is that solely from your delegation strategy, or is the Cardano Foundation's vision of Cardano moving forward and essentially the idealistic view of all stake pool operation on Cardano? Do you believe that single pool operators are what Cardano should be moving forward, or and really are multi-pool operators bad? Are they looking past Cardano's parameters and ignoring them, and running these multi-pools against Cardano? Is being a single stake pool operator what you should do if you feel if you want Cardano to succeed long term?
Probably think about it a little bit like when you want to do a pizza in a stone oven, right? So there's multiple ways to put the dough together. There's multiple ways to put the topping together. You can go for more like an ecological, sustainable solution where all the ingredients are like 20 kilometers away from your house and there's no like large supply chain around it. But you can also have a good business model where everything is as cheap as possible, is frozen down, and it can be mass distributed into areas who simply cannot afford to get food, and it's a good way of doing delivery. Is one bad? Is one not bad? That's a really hard one to call out. So the way I think about it is that today there is huge incentive for exchanges to run a centralized stake pool operator service. The owner of the ADA, they have a very secure wallet. There might even be like an insurance component around that, and it's very easy for the exchange to keep everything under one roof. It's optimized towards yield. It's not optimized towards impact. So we see that operating model works really well, right? There's even some exchanges who have more than 70. So, and if you look into the nature of proof of stake, you would also find that some centralization is actually expected. Large stake pool operators would tend to do better than small, just based on the math. But luckily we have the K factor, right? And the K factor gives a little bit of a balance. But what we haven't seen is that these exchanges, even though they're doing a lot of good advertisement, they haven't built a lot of tools for the ecosystem. They haven't spread a lot of love for the ecosystem. They don't care so much about what token or what business they're selling, as long as there is liquidity there. Therefore, we said, okay, so how do we go to the other ends of the pendulum and start supporting some of the people who do content, who moderate, who do translations, who do tools, and operate a single stake pool all the time? Because if K is not moving, how do we actually, how do we give some love over there? And as they're anyway are building, but they might not have sufficient time to build because they have a day job and they need to, run two jobs, one the stake pool and the other one maybe another job. How do we actually ensure that they have best of the brain power available to do that? So I think about a little bit about, we shouldn't be calling out what's good and what's bad, but we should ensure that what creates largest adoption and the largest, let's say, use of the Cardano blockchain in multiple different ways, not just one use case, is what we need to support. Because if then one use case due to regulatory means is cut off, then we still have 100 other use cases. Or if something doesn't work out over the long time, nobody uses the technology, then we have 99 other use cases. So this diversity in the uses of the blockchain is something we have a lot of focus on. And then last but not least, still coming back to these economic incentives, I think it's really, really important that we start understanding how they're going to play out in the long run. I think, Stakepool operators is a direct incentivized population on the blockchain who has one of the most important jobs. They actually run the blockchain. And therefore, I'm also a big fan of the SIP 47 and, building in this opportunity that Stakepool operators not just have a implicit say of it, they actually can choose to run the code or not the code, but there is also more formal say in terms of they accepting a hard fork combinator, yes or no.
Yeah. That I really appreciate that answer, and I agree completely with your delegation strategy. It doesn't make sense to support multi-stake pool operators, and I also see the huge issue with exchanges. I mean, not only do exchanges run these large farms and they're not incentivized to run proper servers, they're not incentivized to update in time. On top of that, they're also incentivized more than everyone else on the entire ecosystem. The A0 parameter, it pays out 30% more on top of the 4% people are already earning. So if people are earning, 4%, the exchanges are all earning 5.1%. So there's really a direct incentive for exchanges on Cardano to say, hey, look, we're going to pay you guys all more rewards than your stake pool operators. We're going to get your vote. You're also going to get added risk in case the servers are hacked or the exchanges go down. I agree with that completely, and I think that the A0 parameter needs to be changed. I don't think that exchanges should have voting keys, nor should I think they should run these large server farms. But from my perspective, there is nuance to that. Multiple operators in the ecosystem that are providing value, building community tools, and employing people, and exchanges that they don't have any say. Like it doesn't matter what happens to them because they have all this money coming no matter what. They hold the funds themselves. Whereas I or Rick or other multiple operators, if we do something wrong, if I say something that my delegates don't like, I'm accountable to them. Whereas Binance isn't. So moving forward, I think that's important is just the nuance between large exchanges and smaller operators that need support and multiple operators that are developing this ecosystem, especially as we move towards the future of smart contract delegation, where it's going to be DAOs and protocols delegating to their own pools, and these DAOs and protocols have 7 pools, and who are they up against? It's very interesting the way things are going.
Yeah, and I think some of this is also just operational efficiency. People sometimes underestimate how much it actually takes to get those lists and go through those reviews and actually have a balanced view on it. But from our point of view, I think we're just, when we get D-reps and a couple of more tooling on the blockchain, I think we will definitely look into also delegating to people who operate multiple pools. The reason we cut the line as we cut the line is because then there was no discussion. And I think we can, already today we feel more comfortable in maybe taking another step because we're very clear about who is it we don't want to delegate to. Mm-hmm. And it's not just because you run 2 or 3 pools. Actually, what we want to hit is the people who actually contribute to the community and contribute with tooling or code or in other ways, spread the message about utility of the Cardano blockchain. So It's definitely something we have on our radar, and it's been up in the meeting several times.
Yeah, and with how complicated, all of this is and how hard it is to look through all of this information and find the nuance to it, when people see CF is only supporting single pools, which I think that's the right decision to go down, they think that, CF thinks all are bad and they must, fight for that, so that really does explain things. I really appreciate that. One thing that, the community kind of, uproared about, just building off of this was the advertising of the Binance staking feature, that was pushed through on the Twitter. I'm curious, did you guys ever have, a formal response to that of, did you guys just advertise the Binance staking because the US is now offering that?
Oh, so yeah, that was an interesting one. So I think on one hand, what you need to understand is we've been working very, very hard with several large exchanges and banks to get ADA and to get staking and to really start embracing some of the tooling on it. And I think for one of our teams, this was a very, very proud moment that we actually got to a situation that this was solved and they're offering that to the clients in the US based side. So we were very proud about that.
Yeah.
But when we look at the Cardano Foundation strategy, what is it we're trying to achieve? I would have loved that we would have added a little bit more information to that tweet. And I debriefed with the team afterwards, and and I said, and they all agreed to it. So I think it was just, it was a good task done. What we should have written about it and what we should have explained more is what is the purpose of us supporting this?
Yeah.
So the first purpose is, as I said earlier in this interview, we need to ensure that there's liquidity there. So the ADA fiat rails and the fiat ADA rails, they need to be there, and there needs to be as much liquidity as possible out there. Therefore, the exchanges and the banks, they play a huge role in that. The second thing, which is the next obvious step, and I think that's where we are on the maturity side, is you need to ensure that you're not locked into only being able to stake into one bespoke pool. We're working very heavily with a lot of these exchanges, and we're trying to incentivize them either through knowledge or education or through research, and to ensure that they actually open up for this opportunity to support impact stake pools or to import single stake pools or to support tooling or whatever your desire is. So it nearly becomes like an asset management model where you're trying to express, your portfolio towards multiple stake pool operators depending on your need for yield, your need for impact, your need for, I really love this person who's giving me the news every single day and I want to, throw some love in his direction, but also to how you optimize towards the security on the network.
Yeah.
And I was about to say nearly more important than that, but we don't really have that feature yet, right, is the voting. Not just the catalyst voting, but also in the future, the governance voting. So how do we ensure that as many people as possible will actually have a say in the Cardano blockchain when these features come live as a part of Voltaire, which will be delivered by IoT? And that's very, very near and dear to our heart because the three things Cardano should do, which is beyond what many other blockchains does today, is representation of value. Not just one, but representations of value. It's governance and it's identities, not just one type of identity, but different type of identities. So all of the three things are in plural. So as these exchanges and custodians are the guardians, if you don't do self-custody yourself, to how you actually collaborate and do things on the blockchain, this is a journey we are on. And for many, this is not, there's no direct monetary incentive to doing this. And many other blockchains have taken the approach that we just pay them. So some foundations that just went out there and they paid a lot of money for integration fees into exchanges. And then, it was integrated, there were certain features integrated, but nobody was using it. We're taking the other approach. We're trying to explain how valuable is it actually, not just direct economically, but also about your own infrastructure, about your community, about making your clients sticky. So you can actually attract a lot more very interesting ADA holders if you offer more features. And these people would then give you insight to what is near and dear to them because they're actually blockchain citizens. They tick differently. They are a new generation of bankers or bankable clients. And some of them might not even like you because they're not a fan of banks. They're more Kryptonians, right? They don't like to be with a bank or an intermediary who do certain things. So I think there's good room for also different interpretations of those business models. And I think, unfortunately, that got a little bit lost in that tweet. I think we should have mentioned more about why this was important because it was a big scalp for our team.
Yeah.
But we need to ensure that people understand what is the road we're traveling. And that road ends up with that if you want to use the Cardano blockchain for good, you don't need to build your own bank and you don't need to have personal protection and keep your keys in your sacred place, but you can actually have a business model where you are a developer or you are an NGO or you are a nation state and you can actually have a custodian who takes care of the risks around the keys, but still participate, launching smart contracts, writing metadata and doing the things you really want to do on the blockchain. But there's also an opportunity that for some of us who don't really like to be with banks who decide everything, we can have our own keys like we are used to. We are feeling comfortable with the security we built about that, and we can still use the features of the Cardano blockchain. And unfortunately, we've seen some changes in regulation recently, goes in a direction that we are being forced to use, VASP or regulated custodians. The Cardano Foundation is, spending more and more resources on interacting and answering some of these suggestions to new regulations and informing these policymakers and regulators about there is different ways of doing it. It's not just a binary decision you need to do, because you are getting more transparency, you are getting more utility, you are getting a better governance and a better population by deploying a blockchain. And I think this is sometimes a little bit lost in the fight for, the next, crypto summer or whatever we call it these days.
It's also lost in 240 characters sometimes, right? Yeah.
That's also true.
Yeah. Well, we're getting low on time. I do really appreciate you coming on today and answering all of those questions. And, to me, the response to that makes sense. It's a lot easier, for the community to get, mad and angry because they see, a post about Binance staking, but that is kind of your guys' job. And if your team had worked very hard on that, you want to say, hey, look, we are building infrastructure with exchanges, but, as always, there is always need for, more explanation, in a community that is so passionate about decentralization and moving this protocol forward. So look forward to seeing you at the summit. Thank you for your time as always. I really appreciate it. Anything else you want to say before we head out of here today?
Oh, just thank you for all your contribution to the Cardano ecosystem. You're a big voice out there, and I'm looking forward to having a team at the Rare Bloom event as well. It looks really phenomenal what you've created there. So we're happy to also sponsor part of that. And yeah, we're just getting started. Many people forget this, but the winter is actually a pretty good thing. We can get a lot of the building done, and we're getting more and more requests about, really cool business cases and really cool technology stacks. There's a lot of development happening. So I think, stay tuned, come to the summit, come and celebrate 5 years of Cardano, but also celebrate a vibrant community of builders and creators. Really the architects of the future is coming together. And, I think, when good brains comes together, beautiful things happen.
Yep, we can, the architects of the future, we can celebrate the crypto winter in Switzerland on November 15th. I'll see you guys there. If you enjoyed the podcast, I really appreciate it. If you made it till the end, please type Frederick down below to let us know. I appreciate you guys. If you enjoyed it, let us know. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them down below. Like, as always, subscribe, hit that notification bell. See you guys.